Hello, everybody. Welcome to Medicine and Science. My name is Nick Palavito. I'll be the moderator of today's program. And today we have a very exciting topic. We're going to be discussing a Dr. Naomi Wolf. Now, honestly, I've never heard of this person, but apparently this person's pretty famous, even though I didn't hear about him. But the other thing that's quite interesting about this particular individual, Dr. Naomi Wolf, is not a medical doctor. Yet opines consistently on medical issues, which I find to be very misleading and hilarious for people that listen to her. And her ideas are kind of like OTT, over the top, but not on television. And the television she has been on, she's been booted out. But I honestly, I never heard of this lady, so I did my research on her, and she's like a wild cat. But it creates a problem for not just our viewers, but for everybody in the world. How do you know you're listening to somebody who's actually a real medical doctor as opposed to a person who has a doctorate in English? And with that, since I don't know the answer to that question, I'm going to a real medical doctor who can help us out, and that's Dr. Michael Patmos. Dr. Michael Patmos, welcome to Medicine and Science. Tell us about the real medical doctors versus the doctors who aren't medical doctors but pretend to be. What's going on out there?
Well, good morning, Nick, and good morning to all your viewers. This is a very significant issue, and one that has came to my attention really 50 years ago when I was in medical school. There's a lot of people that the title doctor carries a lot of panache. It's a weighty title, and people, like to be called doctor. And, legally, and it's appropriate if you have a doctoral degree in anything, whether it's medicine or dentistry or English literature, whatever it might be, you're entitled to use the term doctor. But for the lay person, very often that term doctor suggests, not necessarily, perhaps incorrectly so, that the person is a physician, a medical doctor. And so that's where the confusion lies in. Most physicians will don't use the term like Dr. Michael Patmos. They will say Michael Patmos, MD. They'll put their credential after their name so that the viewer can sort of discern whether the person is, a PhD or an MD or a doctor of physical therapy or a doctor of whatever. Those are all terminal degrees. They're all legitimate in their own right. I'm not disparaging the degree. I'm just making the point that when you say I'm Dr. So-and-so, the lay public will very often just interpret it to think that you're a doctor. Now, in this case, Naomi Wolf is a brilliant person, very highly educated, with a PhD, a doctoral degree in English literature from Oxford. And she's a prolific writer. She's written many books and novels. And some of the books that she's written over the years include The Beauty Myth, The End of America, Letter of Warning to a Young Patriot, Vagina, a New Biography, What I Know Now, Letters to My Younger Self, Die Stark die Frauen, I don't speak German too well, and a bunch of other books. And she's made a lot of money as a writer. She jumped in the early on in the feminist movement, which I applaud. And she wrote there. She also wrote some stuff. She's of Jewish ancestry, and she wrote some stuff very critical of Israel, which I think sold a lot of books. And in the last few years, she has jumped on the anti-vax bandwagon and written extensively and shared a lot of misinformation about COVID and COVID vaccine. Of course, she has no credentials in science or medicine, so she really can't understand what it is she's writing about. All she can do is repeat something else that she reads and puts in a book, and she's made a lot of money doing this. But the point is, people on the internet think she's an MD, and they're quoting her as if she's some sort of authority, and she's not.
Well, that seems to be a good introduction to this Dr. Naomi Wolf, but it also creates a real problem that we're seeing out there. The internet creating lies. We're going to bring our panelists in because Rick Rosner, who is not a medical doctor, but he's a member of the High IQ Society, otherwise known as the Mega Society, which I've known for years. A lot of people don't know that means your qualifying scores have to be 1 out of a million. Forget the 3-digit number. It's meaningless, but 1 out of X is meaningful. So we're going to bring in Rick Rosner.
So here's how crazy, all right, here's how crazy Naomi Wolf is. There's another author named Naomi Klein, also kind of writes in the same fields, like, you know, a feminist, and for their whole professional lives, they've been confused with each other. The two Naomis. Naomi Klein wrote a book last year called Doppelganger, which is about her experience of what happens when the person you're confused with goes crazy. Because it's been tough on Naomi Klein, because Naomi Wolf, like, some people go crazy. Some people were always crazy and they just didn't come out of the crazy closet until, you know, an issue like made them surface. But yeah, Naomi Wolf is, and like other people, like Laura Logan used to be a 60 Minutes reporter. She goes into a failed state. It might have been Syria, and gets sexually assaulted in a crowd, which is tragic. But ever since, she went crazy. She went from 60 Minutes to the very super fringe of right-wing, you know, pseudo journalism. Yeah. Maria Bartiromo used to be called the Money Honey. You know, she talks about finances, but she's gone like super crazy and Trumpy, and is part of the lawsuits for election denial. And that Robert guy, who calls himself
Maloney or whatever his name is.
Malone, yeah. At some point, maybe that guy wasn't crazy. But the deal is that over their lives, some people go crazy.
Well, that's a good question I have, Rick, because there's been studies done that as people's IQs increase, their evidence toward mental illness also increases, which I don't know if you've read this, but I went over it with Kevin Langdon, one of your friends in the Mega Society. He goes, yeah, it's true. As you get smarter. Now, she seems to have the smart. She went to Yale University for undergrad, got her PhD at Oxford. It looks like she went to Trinity College. So the indication that she's highly intelligent seems to be there. Is it quite possible that she suffers from mental illness, or is she really mentally insane and she's just looking to make a lot of money?
Well, we got a doctor here, so we can ask the doctor about frontotemporal dementia, which has been waved around with regard to Trump a lot, though. I think because of the things he says, also because he has a way of standing tilted forward. Now, I don't buy it in Trump's case. I think he's wearing lifts in his shoes that throw him forward, but there is a disease that before it kills you in your 50s, it makes you go nuts in very interesting ways.
If I know a lot about frontotemporal degeneration, I had the opportunity to study that disease extensively in the last few years, and it's a very complicated neurodegenerative disorder. Has a long span. It takes about 20 years or more for it to reach its final stages. And early on in frontotemporal degeneration, patients will manifest very bizarre behavior. They'll say things in public that no one would say, do things like grope somebody in public out of, and not have any clue that they're doing something stupid. And we'll do things like peculiar things, like their eating habits change and they begin to eat like a wild animal, shoving food into their mouth. So these are just some interesting aspects of FTD. But that's beside this. I'm not opining as to whether or not Dr. Wolf has any mental illness. I just, look at her net worth. She's worth estimated upwards of $5 million. And I don't know how many people with degrees in English literature become multimillionaires. I think the way to leverage a degree in English literature is to become a novelist and write popular books and pick things that are contrary, pick topics that are contrarian and likely to be provocative. And you'll probably be able to sell a lot of books and make a lot of money. That's my view of it, but then I'm not that smart.
Oh, wait, I got one more doctor to talk about. Go. Dr. Laura. Dr. Laura is a radio advice giver who's been on the radio, I don't know, 40 years now. And her trademark is kind of telling people to their face that they're terrible people. People ask for advice, and then she goes in, yeah, you're awful. You've abandoned your children and your responsibility. And she's people like listening to her because they like people being just ripped to shreds. But Dr. Laura is a doctor of anatomy, not a doctor of psychology. She could probably name all the muscles and bones in the human body. That doesn't qualify her to give advice, but she's been using the doctor forever.
Well, there's also
look at Frasier, right? I mean, he not only made a name for himself on a TV show about a radio show, but people loved it because he was just brutally honest from his opinion. And I think that that's the disclaimers that need to be given in any book that you write. I am no doctor by any means, but I am the perfect patient. Anything that I have been through, I am an expert at. For myself, I don't mind sharing my experiences with people so that maybe they don't have the same issues that I ran into, or that they can get to a resolution quicker. I think with Naomi Wolf, she sounds like a very intelligent person who knows how to do research to write. Does that make her an expert at what she writes about? Probably not a direct expert. What I think that, and I would have to read her books before I say one thing or the other about her claim to being a doctor, and maybe she needs to be a little more careful of that for other people who might say take it more credibility for medical, which I think is very wrong. I think, and I am very careful about looking at doctor of MD when I look for a doctor. But I think that just like when I write about things, do a white paper, I might not have been a subject matter expert about it at the time, but it had my interest. I sat down, I did the research, and then I documented it and wrote it. Whether it was read or not, I don't know. I've had a few people read my my work and say that I'm always dead on. Now, and I think that maybe she's just making awareness to people, making them aware of certain things. Whether she's guiding them to think a certain way or not, I don't know. I think people need to be careful about that. I think presenting facts, this is the facts of this situation. This is the documented information I have. This is what one doctor says. This is what another doctor says. This is what a panel says. This is what physically happened to somebody. That's a little different. And I would have to read her books. But I think, perceiving yourself as a medical doctor just because you have a PhD would be very, very misleading and very wrong. And I think people need to be very careful when they look at her books before they sit there and go, oh, the credibility of a doctor. But I'm going to have to sit down and read her book on any of these things. But I find that the topics that you mentioned seem to be more about her wanting to bring people open to topics that she had curiosity about.
Well, the thing is, one of her statements made, and I had a real problem with this, Dr. Patmos and Kim. She made a statement that 40% of the people, 40% of women who take the COVID vaccine will suffer from a miscarriage. Okay. Signed off, Dr. Naomi Wolf. Okay. I got a real problem with that. And by the way, so did the British, and so did Twitter, and they struck her down from different places. But a lot of places in the United States, because we have the First Amendment, freedom of speech, apparently she has the right to mislead people saying, I'm Dr. Naomi Wolf. And I would like to let you know 40% of women who took the COVID-19 vaccine suffered from a miscarriage. Totally false statement. And it's, by the way, it's been debunked. Totally a statement that she's made. And how do you stop somebody like her from scaring the bejeevers out of the normal people who don't realize the facts? She's not a medical doctor. And by the way, 40% of the people that took the COVID vaccine did not have a miscarriage. It wasn't even close. She just basically lied on the internet. Now, am I thinking she's delusional? Dr. Patmos believes she's just looking for attention. She can make money. Either way, it's wrong. Yeah, Rick.
I think
think-
marketing
don't-
has a huge factor.
Don't half of all pregnancies end in miscarriage? So probably 40% of women who didn't get vaccinated suffered. So you need to get vaccinated if you don't want to have a miscarriage.
I mean, I've just a friend of mine. They've just suffered a miscarriage. So I mean, yeah, it's a high rate right now. What's causing it? I don't know. We've
It
always
just
had a
happened.
high.
My mom had babies in the 60s. She had 2 kids and then she had 2 miscarriages. And it's super sad, but that's what happens.
Yeah. Well, the studies that were done showed no correlation at all, 0. Okay, but see, the
I
damage
think
that she
that
does,
she
the
needs
damage she
to.
does is pretty high by
I think
making.
her arrogance got the best of her, as it does with most leaders. And like Nick, you were talking about, and I mean, this is something that I was recently reading about, especially when I was in Bali. How leaders tend to go to their head. Does it make them mentally ill? I don't know. But these things go to their head, that they're a leader and people follow them and believe them.
Yeah.
And, before long, they start misleading them. And why is that? Right. And I mean, our own leaders do that. They let this ego system get into them, and then they become something more evil than what we needed. Because it becomes about them and not about the true leadership that they were probably destined for. Because some people are good leaders, but I think that maybe it was marketing for money. I think it was ego, and I think it was her own personal agenda rather than hey, let's talk about this topic. How many women? I would have addressed it as, how many women have had miscarriages since COVID? That's where I would start. And then I would go into how many had the COVID shot, how many had the first one, how many had the second one. But then I would go back and say, okay, let's take a look at how many women had miscarriages before COVID. And she didn't do that. There was no fact-driven concept. No. That's how she addressed it. So
but there's no punishment for people. And I'm not picking on her specifically.
And I have an issue with that.
I have a real problem with that freedom of speech can create damage, and there's no punishment that's involved. So it allows people, because like in my industry, if you misstate the law, you can be sued for malpractice, you can be disbarred. If you're a real doctor, which he's not, she could potentially lose her medical license. But being a false doctor, not even a doctor, she can go ahead and make these blanket statements, and there's no repercussions whatsoever. So I think somewhere along the line, we need to change this. Otherwise, people will be sucked into, you're going to see more and more people being sucked into people like her. And we need to have some recourse to it. What are your thoughts, Dr. Patmos?
You're absolutely right, Nick. And this is a big issue throughout the whole COVID story. If you look at nearly every famous COVID anti-vax expert that you see on Fox, on TV, on Twitter, and all, none of them actually have the correct credentials. Some of them aren't doctors at all, like Dr. John Campbell, who has a very successful YouTube channel with millions of followers. His doctoral degree is in nursing education. He's not a physician. But again, like Dr. Wolf, he says Dr. John Campbell, and he opines as an expert and tries to dissect literature that he's not trained to dissect, and misleads people. But there are a whole host of others that don't have the proper qualifications, but they're presented to the public as if they have the correct qualifications. Some of them actually have false qualifications on their resumes. I've done the research and fact-checked their resumes, and they don't have the qualifications they claim to have. But others are they might be a family physician or an OBGYN, or, they're not infectious disease doctors. COVID is a very complicated infectious disease. And in order to really grasp the nuances, the clinical nuances and subtleties of this illness and how to manage it from a clinical point of view, you have to really be trained in it. And that requires a fellowship in infectious diseases. You're not going to go to an oncologist to deliver a baby. And you're not going to go to a neurosurgeon to fix your broken ankle. Similarly, you don't go to a non-infectious disease doctor for a complicated infectious disease problem. That's why infectious disease doctors are the experts. They're the consultants in the hospitals who do these consultations that other doctors request. So this problem of fake and false credentials is rampant throughout the media and has directly harmed people when it comes to COVID.
How
So
many
there's one more-
infectious disease? Go ahead.
There's one more thing that happened today that's making anti-vaxxers go crazy that should be addressed, which is AstraZeneca has announced they're no longer going to make their COVID vaccine. They gave 3 billion doses worldwide, but it's kind of obsolete because it was a vaccine early on. The virus has shifted, so Pfizer and others are more effective at this point. But the anti-vaxxers are saying it's because it killed everybody. 3 billion doses, estimated it saved, billions of lives worldwide. 58 people died after getting it from a blood clotting disorder, which is a rate of 1 in 52 million, which is makes it much safer than getting COVID, which at the time it was being given, COVID was killing 1 person in 100 maybe.
Yeah, it's very important, extremely important to point out the AstraZeneca vaccine is not the messenger RNA-based vaccine that was given to billions of people around the world. That's not the Pfizer, Moderna messenger RNA-based vaccine that got the Nobel Prize. The AstraZeneca vaccine is an old style vaccine, a viral vector-based vaccine, and it was associated with an increased risk of blood clots, and it was taken off the market in the United States for that reason. It's an inferior vaccine. Very few people in the United States were given that vaccine. Most everybody got the You can't confuse the AstraZeneca vaccine with the messenger RNA. They're 2 completely different vaccines. And I think the AstraZeneca vaccine was not a good vaccine. And I'm glad it's not available anymore.
Well, I think
I want to
we need
point
to hear
out that
from,
during the whole COVID situation, we did not have any infectious disease experts, nor did we have pandemic team experts in charge. One, the first thing I did, and I was reading about COVID-19 in the National Geographic publications 1 month prior to when, it all became this hectic thing. So why didn't anybody know about it? Because I was reading about it. It was right there. And it was saying everything that it would do to the human body. On top of that, there were research being done for the last 12 years, paid for by our tax dollars, on infectious diseases of the lung and on cures for it. And they actually had some, and I'll send it to you, doctor. They actually had some that were truly working, no side effects through all the tests that they had done, and they took it off the market right when COVID hit. Now, my theory on that is that because it was supposed to go to FDA approval, my theory now is that they're going to sell it off to someone and use it for all the destroyed lungs that occurred during COVID. A conspiracy theory person I can be, but there's just too many coincidences for me for it to be a coincidence. Yeah. But I have an issue with the fact that all the documentation that we needed about COVID-19 existed. It existed right there in front of our faces. The president didn't look at it. His vice president didn't look at it. Nobody looked at it, but we did not hire a pandemic team expert. That's the problem.
So, here's what my perspective on that. Trump in the beginning had experts to rely upon, and he trashed them all. He didn't like the advice that they gave. So he vilified them, trashed them, pushed them aside, and brought in a team of doctors, none of whom are trained in infectious diseases. Some of them don't even have licenses to practice medicine. He brought in a radiologist, an economist, and a guy who had 1 year pathology internship, and they became his COVID expert team. And he engaged, and he started, and Trump is a very powerful communicator. He started this vilification of true infectious disease experts. He destroyed them in the media, and he and he started the ball rolling, attacking all of our infectious disease institutions and experts. I mean, these people had threats on their lives. And you know who I'm talking about, Deborah Birx and Anthony Fauci. These are big names in the infectious disease world. And he just destroyed them because he didn't like what they were telling him. They were telling him, this is going to kill a lot of people and you need to take action. The action that was required, that they were recommending, would hurt the economy. He didn't want to do that with an election coming up. So he got rid of all of them and he brought in doctors who were unqualified, who would tell him what he wanted to hear, which was basically, we want them infected, let it rip, and herd immunity. That was the people that's who he brought in, and 300 to 400 million people died unnecessarily as a result.
I agree.
What do you think of the CDC? Because I'm not an authority on anything, but it seems like the CDC even now is playing, let's just pretend like things are normal versus, getting health information out there.
So 50 years ago, when I was in medical school, boy, that sounds like a long time ago. I remember being told as a freshman in medical school that every week you should subscribe to and receive the CDC monthly, it's called the MMWR, Mortality and Morbidity Weekly Report, the MMWR, Mortality and Morbidity Weekly Report from CDC. If you don't read that once a week, you should not be a doctor. That's what I was told as a first-year medical student. CDC is the world's authority on surveillance of infectious diseases. They're the ones who pick up when Ebola pops in Africa. They're the ones who find it. And when other diseases pop out of nowhere, they're the ones who find it. And they put into place all the actions that we need to stop and contain these epidemics. It's a revered entity in medicine. And yes, it's a political agency, and the people who run it are going to have our political appointees. So it's subject to some manipulation in that regard. But CDC is a very highly respected entity. It was Trump who trashed the CDC. And now you listen to these MAGA people and they think CDC and World Health Organization are terrible organizations. They're not. These are epic institutions. The World Health Organization eliminated smallpox from the face of the earth. I have great respect for CDC, World Health Organization, FDA, NIH, Infectious Disease Society of America. They're the experts.
You're in Hawaii, right?
Yes. Aloha. So
Hawaii has done really well with COVID.
Yeah,
For one thing, you're an island. But are
Yes.
you still masking, or when did you quit masking?
Oh, so Hawaii is a very different kind of culture, because Captain Cook brought diseases in, and this Native Hawaiians are very sensitive to mainlanders and outsiders who bring diseases in. Leprosy, tuberculosis, venereal diseases, all were introduced into the Hawaiian Islands by explorers. And so they're very uptight about it. Well, when COVID happened, Hawaii locked down, shut down, and we immunized everybody. And Robert Malone came here, tried to convince people not to get immunized. He got run out of town on a rail. Nobody paid attention to him. But Hawaii did great in the beginning. The lowest mortality rate per capita for COVID of any state in the country. Florida had like 5 times the mortality rate. So Hawaii did really good. However, in recent months now, things have really become more lax. Tourism, has returned, and people are bringing COVID. And now Hawaii's COVID rates are moving up. They're still way better than any other state, but they are moving up.
Well, we have only a couple minutes left, but it's a real problem, because in the securities area, which I work very closely with securities people that are Series 6, 7, 26 licensed, if they make statements, they have to have statements approved by the broker dealer to make sure that they're not misleading to the public. However, in the internet, with doctors that aren't doctors, they can make misleading statements all the time, and apparently some medical doctors can too, with no broker dealer supervision whatsoever. And so we've got a real problem here. I don't know how we're going to solve it. Yeah, Dr. Pappas.
You're right. I think with this situation we need some kind of, the public needs to be better protected. We're leaving the public vulnerable to fake experts with false information who are killing them. And we've got to do something about it. We're just letting people be vulnerable.
We just have one comment in Australia. We're here in Australia to take the AstraZeneca after complications. The Prime Minister finally relented and ordered Pfizer and Moderna. Goes back even in Australia, they have, politics when it comes to medicine, which is a real problem. That it's not like a medical doctor's guiding us. We have politicians who are guiding the medical decision, and this is what I would say is a bad deal. I know, yeah, it's something we're also going to have to really look at. And just like in law, we actually have a Supreme Court of real jurists. We don't have a Supreme Court in medicine, which is very unfortunate. That should override politicians, but we need to change our medicine and science in this country. Yeah, Rick, last statement.
I got 13 sets of hair transplants. And there's so doctors who maybe weren't doing so well in whatever field they were in, or like, this just mints money moving hair around. And so like I always went to the cheapest doctor, and yeah, there's no licensing. People, they practice on honeydew melons. And so I had some very interesting results for going to the cheapest doctor. There's no qualification.
Yeah. Usually when I have a heart operation, I look for the cheapest surgeon, but maybe not. With that, we'll see you next week on Medicine and Science.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.